All right, I think we finally made it. Internet has been giving me some challenges this morning, today. So let's see. We're good. We're good. Live feed good. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good morning. Wherever you are in the world, whether it's the morning, the afternoon, the evening, the nighttime. Good morning. Thank you for logging on. Looking forward to today's conversation. As we've been doing for the last couple of weeks, today is Wealth Talk Tuesdays, and I am your host. Thinking about saying that for the last couple of days. And I am your host. I got to get that right. And I am your host, Kevin Breckenridge. All right, I don't think anybody's on yet, so we'll call these the blooper moments. The blooper moments. But yeah, welcome to another edition of Wealth Talk Tuesdays. Today we will be talking about, we'll be continuing about the 4 cash flow quadrants. Today we are talking about the B Quadrant. So we've covered the overall quadrant in week 1, and week 2 we covered the employee quadrant, which was the E quadrant. Last week we covered the S quadrant, which is the small business quadrant, and the B quadrant, which is the business quadrant. And then next week we'll cover the last quadrant of the 4, and that's the I quadrant. So if you are logging on for the first time and you missed those previous conversations about the other aspects of the quadrant, you can find those on my Instagram TV feed, on my Facebook fan page. The full videos are there, so just take some time to go back and check those out. You definitely want to have a full contextual understanding of the 4 cash flow quadrants if you are going to navigate, through the journey of building wealth and building out, your investment portfolio and economic dependence and all that good stuff that we're talking about. So looks like I'm already late. I apologize for being late if you were waiting for the 1 p.m. to start. The Wi-Fi wasn't connected, so I'm going to have to go the old school way and run an Ethernet cable, which, even no matter how advanced technology is, sometimes just being basic and getting back to the basics actually is best. So I'll give it about another minute. Since I'm starting late, I'll give it another minute. We can get some other folks to log on. If you're watching me on IG, make sure you follow me on Facebook, my Facebook fan page. Also check out my website when you get a chance. The website, link in the bio, has got all the information for you to get there easily. If you are following me or if you're watching on Facebook, do me a favor, follow me on Instagram, check out my website, make sure you actually like my fan page. I'm going live from my fan page as well as my personal page. So if you're on my personal page and on my friends list, do me a favor and just like my fan page. It's much appreciated. Now, this conversation, questions while we're talking about today's quadrant, feel free to put it in the comments. I'm doing the best I can to monitor the comments. So if I see it, I'll respond to it. If not, I'll try to respond to it at a later time on another live feed. And I think that's about it. That's it for all the introductions. Let's get to business. All right, let's get to it. So today we are talking about the 4 quadrants, right? The E quadrant stands for employee. The S quadrant stands for small business owner. The B quadrant stands for business owner. And the I quadrant stands for investor. Just make sure everybody can see that. Do a roundabout circle. All right, so last week we talked about being in the S quadrant, which is a small business quadrant, where the average millionaire in America occupies at least the S quadrant of the 4 cash flow quadrants. Now, if you are just watching for the first time, the 4 cash flow quadrants basically is a visual breakdown as well as a detailed breakdown, but it's a breakdown essentially of the 4 ways people bring in income. All right, so last week we were talking about being a small business owner. I gave a lot of ideas and characteristics of what that looks like, but basically anyone who starts a business and they're working business and they are responsible to some degree for providing the product or for providing the service, that's a small business. Now we can talk about there's distinctions, different distinctions in terms of like revenue levels, or whether you're a small business, mid-sized, large business, etc. But just in the basic structure not included, if you are responsible for providing the product or the service to some degree, then you are a small business owner. So how do you make the transition from small business owner to business owner? Essentially, and I'll tell you a little bit about my journey while we have a few minutes to kind of give a little more context. So if you don't know, you're like, why should I be listening to this guy? Why am I watching this guy talk about the 4 quadrants and business and entrepreneurship and investing and all that type of stuff? So my own personal journey, I talked about it a little bit last week. It actually starts with, and I thought about this last week. My mother, I mentioned my father, who I didn't really know, but my mother as well. She was at one point in time in her career, she was a small business owner, a solopreneur, and actually that's how she met my dad. They both were vendors in Washington, D.C., and she would sell different clothing items and jewelry and things like that. He sold fashionable goods as well, and they basically met. Now the vendor culture in DC has changed a lot. I mean, over the years, there used to be a time where, vendors were all the rave, all the craze. You can go out, every weekend and get everything you needed from a vendor. So this was back in the 80s, 84, 80, 83, 84. And that's how I met my dad, or, my mom met my father, the guy who, donated the sperm. But anyway, so without really knowing it, I didn't really know, I didn't know that anything about that aspect of my mom's life. I didn't know anything about that aspect of my dad's life until I was already really in my mid-20s. So that journey to entrepreneurship, I think, was one that is certainly one that I've kind of picked up just by the nature of, my personality and the personality type that I picked up from my mom, and the personality type that I picked up from my dad. So for me, it was more of an evolution, not one where I was exposed to it, but more one that I just naturally navigated to just based on my personality, my interests, and things like that. Now, last week I talked about, starting out shoveling snow and cutting grass and just kind of, starting to learn about, generating income and generating income for yourself. But even at that time, I didn't really look at it as entrepreneurship. I didn't really look at it as business. I didn't have that contextual knowledge and understanding. I was just looking for work. I was looking at, to make money. And then that was, 10, 11, 12, 13, I think, around when I was in high school. I didn't do too much. I mostly worked a W-2 job in high school, had a bunch of jobs in high school, but I was mostly a W-2 employee, really just living a normal life. It wasn't until I think the summer after I graduated from high school that I started to started to earn income on my own again. And that summer, I'd hate to say that I started a landscape company, but I started a landscape company, and it wasn't one that I was really intent on growing. It was just, all right, I'm looking, to make money this summer. And so basically I started, I put up some flyers. I started going neighborhoods and passing them out, and started to get, one-off contract jobs, basically not knowing, the language for it at the time, but basically going and getting one-off contract jobs to, to cut people's lawns, to, to trim their bushes and things like that. So, fast forward again, just slowly kind of get immersed into this experience in this world of entrepreneurship. That was again around 18, 19. Fast forward to about, let's say, I think I was about 22. I think it was 22 when I actually started, my first, real legitimate business. From 18, 19 to 22, I was a W-2 employee. I was in college, trying to, start to develop that resume, or dig deeper into developing that resume so I could get that good corporate job, post-graduation and everything. But it was around my senior year, 2008. It was January of 2008 that basically me and a couple buddies of mine kind of had this idea. I had this idea, like, I love throwing parties. I was throwing a lot of events through social organizations, a lot of parties, a lot of social events and that. And I really like the idea of bringing people together, of coordinating and, going through the nuances of bringing this idea to fruition where people could come and actually enjoy themselves. So we started this party promotion company, and I was, again, my senior year at UC, and I started throwing parties. And for about 6 months, we did that while I was also working a W-2 job, and I loved it. I mean, the hard part was that I was a college student. I wasn't really a nightlife student, and at that point, I was near graduation, so my mindset was still focused on corporate gig, W-2, benefits, get a good job. I was still employee-minded. I wasn't really entrepreneurship, but the experience itself really started to expose me to the financial opportunities. We had a lot of nights where we made, some good money, but we had some nights where we made like really good money. And I'm talking, we made thousands of dollars, in a single night from throwing parties. Now, and had I been more entrepreneurship minded, I would have took that and I would have continued to run with it. Instead, I was like, nah, this is not what I want to do. That nightlife business, that entertainment business is real sketchy. It's a lot of sketchy people that we were meeting, a lot of issues with, just really dealing with honest and truthful people and people, who had integrity. Not to say that there aren't people in that business who don't, but there also are a lot more people who don't. So anyway, that was my first real legitimate business. But again, I didn't really see it going anywhere. So I just kind of moved on from it, went into the corporate world, and did the corporate world thing for another year and a half until, I started to really not really like what I was doing, and decided I need to kind of venture off and look for some other opportunities. And so went off to Korea, taught English for a year, and came back. And that's where that entrepreneurship journey pick up. And that's where I really started to make a conscious decision to try to figure out, how can I navigate the employment world, and how can I navigate, trying to achieve this goal of independence and, and freedom and having my own work schedule and, that type of thing. And for me, after, doing research and really doing some self-discovery, for me, I thought that real estate was the best way for me to go. And so I started going down the path of becoming a licensed real estate agent. And based off of the nature of being a real estate agent, it really thrust you into small business ownership, and start to really learn how to, again, generate business at a high level where you're selling assets, and then learning how to, essentially put your name down on paper and offer your products or your services. And so that was 2010. I started that journey. Here we are in 2020, and I'll talk more about that at a later point. But just wanted to give you a little contextual knowledge and information about, what my journey has been. So when we compare that to the cash flow quadrant, I've occupied 3 out of the 4 quadrants, and I'm in the process of really occupied 4 of the quadrants, but I'm really learning and working on mastering the quadrant that we're actually talking about today, which is the business quadrant. So I've been an employee times over. I've been a small business owner several times over. I've been an investor. Part of what I do in real estate is investing in real estate, helping other people learn how to invest in real estate, learning how to generate returns from direct investment. I've been able to actually help other people generate returns. I've been able to generate 6-figure returns off of investments. So it's occupying the E quadrant, the S quadrant, the B quadrant, and the I quadrant. So I have experience in all 4. Now, making that transition from the S quadrant to the B quadrant, which I'm in the process of really mastering, is actually taking your mindset, taking your skill set, taking your language, taking your understanding of business, and starting to remove yourself from the everyday activity. Now, it takes time for you. One, it takes time, but it also takes a mindset shift. And the reason why most people can't transition from S quadrant to the B quadrant is because they can't make the mind shift required in order to do that. And that mind shift requires that you no longer view yourself as the only person who is capable of providing that product or that service. Give me a second. Now, some professions are going to require, like if you're in a licensed profession, right? As a licensed realtor, I'm a licensed broker in 3 states. As a licensed professional, when you're licensed, it makes it a lot more difficult for you to transition from the S quadrant to the B quadrant, because it's your knowledge, it's your skills, it's your expertise, it's your experience that is directly related to providing the product or the service for that business. But I'll give you some ideas on how you can transition out of being in that S quadrant to the B quadrant and removing yourself from the everyday activity. But the biggest thing that distinguishes the S quadrant from the B quadrant is the fact that you built a system that no longer needs to run on your daily involvement, your daily direction, your daily execution. It really relationship as the owner, and your ability to manage and to lead the system and the people who actually are hired to run this system. So, for example, what's a good example? A good example of, I'll give you a couple examples. So when you talk about the B quadrant, there are basically 3 main ways, 3 popular ways that people operate in the B quadrant. They either start a business themselves and they build the systems themselves, and then they hire people to come in and to run and to operate those systems. Or a very popular format and a very common and well known is the franchise model. If you're familiar with franchising, think of, if you're not familiar with franchising, of your McDonald's, think of your Chick-fil-A, think of your Wendy's, think of your Subway. All of these companies are not always owned. When you go to a McDonald's or Subway, that particular location may or may not be owned by Subway, the corporation itself. Most times it's going to be owned by someone who is called a franchisee, and that person has bought into the franchise of Subway, the franchise of McDonald's. They bought the system, and then they hire people to run the system for them. So if you go to a McDonald's, 99% of the time, the person who owns that McDonald's, they're not going to be working in that McDonald's, right? You're not going to have any idea who owns that McDonald's or who owns that Wendy's unless you do some research. You find out who is the franchisee for that particular franchise. So that's the idea and the concept behind business ownership and being in the B quadrant. Another popular way that people enter into the B quadrant is, if you're familiar with MLM or multiple level marketing, that's another way where people enter the quadrant. But in that case, they're buying into a business system, and then they're also learning how to operate the business system. So to a degree, it's kind of a quasi between the small business quadrant and the B quadrant, but they're able to build out your MLM business to where you have now a team of people, or you have people under you working, and they're building their business, and those people are building their business. And so you have this business that's growing on top of itself, and you have people who are basically working on their behalf to build their business, and at the same time building your business. Now, some of the companies that, if you aren't familiar with the term MLM or multiple level marketing, if you've ever heard of companies like Amway, World Ventures, Legal Shield, what's another one? ACN. These are what are considered MLMs. So those are the 3 popular ways or most common ways that people enter the business quadrant. But let's say you're a licensed professional, and you've been a licensed professional providing your product or your service, for 10 years or for 15 years, and you're kind of tired of being required to be there every single day in order to earn, a living. Well, what you can start to do is you can start to build out that practice. You can start to build out that business where you are hiring other professionals, or you're hiring other professionals and teaching them and educating them and providing them with what they need to obtain their license. And instead of you providing the service directly, you start to basically build a business where you have these other licensed professionals who come. They may be working for you under some type of compensation plan where they're 100% salary, or their salary plus commission, or something like that. And instead of, again, you providing the product or the service. They're now taking on your clientele, and he's still responsible for marketing or still being a face of that organization, but at least you've started to remove yourself from the immediate impact of bringing in the customer, servicing the customer, or providing the product, and then actually handling every other aspect. Now you've hired someone to manage your books. You've hired someone to help with your sales and going out and closing business or bringing in business. You've hired somebody to do your marketing. And now you're just, again, managing the system. You're managing the people. You might be coaching. You might be mentoring. But you started to remove yourself from the everyday involvement of the business and most in that service that's required. Now, another way that you can enter the S quadrant and transferring from the B quadrant is sometimes people work for a corporation, and they might work for a corporation for 10 years or 15 years or something like that, and they learn everything that they need to learn. They may go back to school and get an MBA, and getting an MBA is more of like a traditional method of how people kind of make that elevation in terms of knowledge, skills, and experience. They may go back and get an MBA, which teaches you how these systems come into play and how those systems, bottom line, and the profit generation and the bottom line of a business. And then they may apply those skills over time by working for a company, working for a corporation for 15 years or something like that, and then going out and actually starting their own business and starting that business from scratch. Or again, like I mentioned earlier, buying into a franchise model and then owning and operating the franchise model simply as the owner. But the ultimate goal as a business owner operating in that B quadrant, the ultimate goal is to own a business system that produces continual profits without requiring you as the individual to be there to run that business really at all, not even day to day, but at all. And the litmus test of whether or not you own a true business is whether you can leave that business for a year or any indefinite amount of time, and that business continues to run. One, it continues to run, it continues to be profitable, and it continues to grow as a business itself. So if you can't do all three of those things simultaneously, then you haven't quite entered, or you haven't out those systems. You're hiring, people to run those systems and things like that, but you haven't achieved actual business mastery yet because you aren't able to, again, complete that litmus test by exiting the business for a year and or more, and the business still being able to run, grow, and continue to be profitable. So let's see, we're at 22 minutes. I think I covered everything that I wanted to cover today. The last thing I'll mention is if you want to transition from the S quadrant to the B quadrant, you basically have two options. You can either build the system yourself, or you can buy into a system. If you build a system yourself, you are literally going to build that system from scratch. You're going to build that system from ground zero, from the bottom. So it's going to take you longer. It's going to be harder. It's going to be a little bit more risky and a lot more challenging. But unless you have it depends on where you start, right? Depends on where you're starting at professionally. It depends on where you're starting out with your skills, but nonetheless, you still are going to go through the challenge of building from scratch. Now, I started from scratch, built now on my second business, actual business that I'm building. And I can tell you, based on, going through the building from scratch, there is just a level of information and a level of knowledge and experience that I think is invaluable that you can't get if you buy into somebody else's model, because you're buying into an existing model and then you're learning how to run that model. Now, that's certainly a faster way. And if you can go that route, certainly go that route. Some businesses, some ideas are just custom. Some ideas you can't really buy into. Depending on, I started out, building my system at 23. I certainly was at a completely different, mode and a completely different mindset. But what I've learned over that amount of time has been invaluable. But nonetheless, if you start out from scratch, there's something that you have to be comfortable with, and it's something that you have to know. Even if you buy into a system, franchise do fail. People get into MLM marketing, often don't see it, actually aren't able or don't see it through to achieve the level that they envisioned when they first signed up to do that MLM. Now, starting from scratch, you have to know that your teacher, right? Your teacher you are literally going to fail your way forward. And so as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, as an aspiring entrepreneur, as someone who is aspiring to build a company, you have to be comfortable with the reality that you are going to fail your way forward. And when you fail your way forward, it literally means that they failed through one or two or three companies. And Robert Kiyosaki says it best, like, you have to be prepared. If 1 out of 10 businesses last from start to finish over the course of 10 years, you have to be willing, if you are a true entrepreneur and you want to see, you want to accomplish, and if you want to accomplish and succeed in the business world, the investing world, have to be willing to fail through those 10 businesses, through those 11 businesses, for you to ultimately achieve your lifelong goal, your life, your lifelong vision. So you're going to fail, and each time you fail, it may be a new business. It may be you refining and editing and improving upon the business that you started, but nonetheless, people don't wake up CEOs, right? You have to learn how to become a CEO. People don't wake up business owners. You have to learn how to become a business owner, how to be an entrepreneur. So you have to learn how to be an entrepreneur. Sometimes people come from those backgrounds where their parents were entrepreneurs, their parents were investors, their parents were business owners, and they can transfer that knowledge. But even then, most business owners are only in the S quadrant. So if you're in the S quadrant, you have never matriculated or tried or succeeded in the B quadrant, you may not have the knowledge or the skills or the context or the experience to pass that knowledge and that information on. So in order to get to that trajectory, if you aren't making that trajectory through corporate America, which very few people are, we got to realize that there's only 100 companies in the Fortune 100. There are only 500 companies in the Fortune 500. There are only 1,000 companies in the Fortune 1,000. So the amount of people who are actually going to obtain the title of CEO, CFO, COO is very limited when you talk about the overall scope of population and people. But, and I'll talk about this on another Wealth Talk Tuesdays, since we're near, and I want to keep this under 30 minutes. I became a CEO, I became an entrepreneur, I became an investor, I became a business owner, and I'm learning to master the B quadrant because I promoted myself, right? I hired myself. I made myself the CEO, right? I elevated my knowledge and my experience through sheer will and determination, rather than waiting on or hoping that I would be able to matriculate through corporate America that title, when there are only 4 Black CEOs in the Fortune 500 companies, Fortune 1000 companies. So realistically, for me, that's that was not a realistic path. Nor did I want to commit, make that commitment to corporate America. But as an individual, right? When we talk economic independence, we talk about achieving financial freedom, we talk about building wealth. The reason why that is so powerful is because as you accumulate the knowledge and the skills and the experience, the only person who then is able to dictate feeling in which you are able to matriculate and grow as a professional, and as you are able to matriculate and to grow financially, is up to you. You are the only person who ultimately has control over your life and where it ultimately ends up. That's a significant amount of power, which requires a significant amount of experience and a significant amount of failing and a significant amount of sacrifice. But if you make that journey, there will be no one else who can ever tell you what the limit is for your career as well as for your pocketbook. So I'm going to end on that note. I encourage you to learn as much as you can about the being an employee, being a small business owner, being a business owner, being an entrepreneur. If you are in the small business quadrant and you want to grow into the B quadrant, one of the foundational books that a lot of entrepreneurs read to kind of start to generate that mindset and to accumulate that information is a book called the E. And they have several different versions that are tailored to different industries. But it started off with the first book, which is called The E-Myth. And I think it's by Michael Gerber, if I'm not mistaken. But it's called The E-Myth. And that book starts to break down the story of a business owner, a small business owner, that small business owner ultimately begins to face, and a solution for how that small business owner can grow into owning an actual business and really start to live the life and the lifestyle that they ultimately got into business to live. And they are no longer imprisoned by the business, which happens a lot. And I can speak from personal experience, but you become imprisoned by your own business because you aren't able to actually grow into the business ownership component and to be able to create a system that can run without you, especially when you start a business that's based on your own idea or your own vision. It's hard to start to let go of, the control over that because you feel like you're losing something when in reality, you're making it advantageous for yourself and you're making it more likely that you're ultimately going to achieve your goal. So that's it for today. I appreciate you for logging on. Let's see. I've got some another live coming up, I think, on Thursday. We're doing another edition of the Wealth Checkup. We're going to be having some conversation with a credit specialist, talking about a bit about credit as we start to gear up for a keynote that I'm doing for a virtual event on August 1st. If you want more information on that event, check out my profile on IG. I'll be posting that information today on Instagram and Facebook, as well as the registration for you to log on and check that out. That's next Saturday at 12 noon on August 1st. So again, appreciate you for logging on. Make sure you like this video. Make sure you share it. Do me a favor, follow my fan page on Facebook. Do me a favor and visit the website. And I'll check you out. I'll catch up with y'all later. Peace.